Last week, just hours after we here in Nerdland had a conversation about profiling and violence, a horrible incident that is now being investigated as a hate crime occurred right here in New York City. A Sikh professor who is also a medical doctor was taking a walk through his community in Harlem at about 8:15 in the evening when he heard people yelling, "Get Osama," and "terrorist." He was then attacked by approximately 20 young men on bicycles. Passers-by helped him to escape, but he was left bruised and bloodied and suffering a fractured jaw. As much as this attack made us sit up and take notice, it is how the doctor responded to the violence that led us to invite him to the studio as our foot soldier of the week. Dr. Prabhjot Singh is an assistant professor at the School of International and Public Affairs at Columbia University, also a physician who lives and works in Harlem, and a national community health expert. And I'm honored to have you here on the set today as our foot soldier. Tell me your reaction to this crime.
First of all, thanks so much for having me on the show. Of course, the immediate reaction is certainly shock, but very quickly afterwards, there was an immediate sense that we have to do something that reaches more deeply than I think what the NYPD, who are doing an excellent job, can do. We need to actually refocus, redouble our efforts on this amazing community that we live in and make sure that things like this don't happen to anybody else again.
And I've read that part of how you believe that could happen is if these young men or other young men like them in the community actually learned more about the Sikh faith, came and worshiped with you even.
I'd take that even a step further. I would say to my attackers, if I could, why don't you spend a day with me in our hard work of taking care of a community and making it healthier? And what they'd see is that the people that we take care of are people like their aunts, their mothers, their sisters. And during that day, I'd ask them to ask me as many questions as they could about my beard, my turban, my faith. And I think that they'd find that we have a lot more in common than they ever imagined.
Your response isn't that you would like them to be rounded up and to go to jail?
I think that as young men who did something like this, they need to take responsibility for what they did. But ultimately, we need to create an environment that is healthy and safe in a deeper way than just looking at incidents as isolated and separate from each other. I think as young men, they should be able to take responsibility, but aim for a pathway of personal growth and wisdom, which I don't see being served by our current criminal justice system.
You know, young African-American men living in Harlem know a little something about being profiled. Know a little. We've talked over and over again on this program about the potential violence, the physical vulnerability of young black men in this city, in cities and states where there are stand your ground laws. The idea that lack of empathy, that they could not extend that sense of their own wrongful profiling towards you feels very, it makes me feel like there's, what would be the way that people could build that kind of bridge?
Well, you know, my wife's response was very similar to my own. She's worried about her one-year-old, but at the same time wants to engage our community. I feel that the empathy that's there is between the mothers of those kids who, after the Trayvon Martin case, I saw worried about their own son, their own children moving around the neighborhood and getting profiled. And in that sense, we don't necessarily need to just go immediately to those young men, but there's a huge community and network around them that also wants to change what our place looks like.
Let me ask you a little bit about the profiling, because often what happens, whether it was in the context of the horrific Oak Creek shootings or your own personal horror here, is that it gets reported as, well, they believed him to be Muslim. And as though, if in fact you were Muslim, or if you had identified, no, I'm not Muslim, I'm Sikh, that this abuse would have stopped.
Well, you know, what happened wasn't an isolated incident. Last year, I wrote in the New York Times an op-ed around anti-Sikh hate crimes. But after a decade of rhetoric around the war on terror, we see that the collateral damage permeates our communities all over the place. And it affects people as broadly as a transgendered woman who was killed in our neighborhood last year. And hate really can target anybody at some point. We really need to make our own communities safer and healthier so that these things don't happen to anybody that looks or acts differently.
I am incredibly pleased to have had at least a few moments to sit here at the table with you. And you should know that all of Nerdland wants you to get better, and that what you have given us today is incredibly inspirational.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you to Dr. Singh. And that is our show for today. But of course, there's always 2 days of Nerdland on the weekend. So thanks to you at home for watching. But come back tomorrow, 10 a.m. Eastern. We are going to answer some flabbergasting questions about Obamacare on our brand new call-in WMHP. And later, we will be joined by a very special guest, Chris Nee, the creator and executive producer of the immensely popular children's show, Doc McStuffins. That's 10 a.m. Eastern tomorrow morning. Right now, it's time for a preview of Weekends with Alex Witt. Hi, Alex.